My name is Camila Foreman, and I'm the Director of Publications at Dia, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the launch of our latest publication, which is quite surprisingly only the second proper monograph on Dorothea Rockburne's decades of art making to date. Long in the making, this book is the culmination of the work of numerous individuals, and I would like to thank first and foremost Dorthea yourself for entrusting us with your work, as well as authors Carrie Lambert-Beatty, Anna Lovett, Jeffrey Soletnik, and especially Ava Diaz, the commissioning editor who wrote for the book, invited these incredible scholars and thinkers, and overall shaped the table of contents with care. From the production side, I'm grateful to designer Jean Wilcox of Wilcox Design, editors Elizabeth Franzen, Svetlana Kitto, and Deirdre O'Dwyer, and Rights and Reproductions associate Jen Kane, who realized this remarkable contribution to contemporary art history and Dia's publications program. In addition, our exhibition at Dia Beacon was made possible by significant support from Koss and Somlin Foundation. Additional support was provided by the Beth Rudin DeWitty, May, and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, Kathy Fold, Horace W. Goldsmith Foundation, New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency, and Samuel I. Newhouse Foundation, Incorporated. The publication was made possible by major support provided by Every Page Foundation, additional support by Furthermore, a program of the J.M. Kaplan Fund, Samuel I. Newhouse Foundation, Incorporated again, and Wyeth Foundation for American Art. And with that, I'll turn things over to Dia's editor, Svetlana Kitto, who will moderate tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming. I'm thrilled to be talking to Dorthea about what you described kind of as your first book. I mean, that's what you were saying yesterday. You weren't saying your
first
second,
and only book.
Your first and only book.
Yeah.
What do you think of the book?
I'm thrilled.
You're thrilled.
And you know, the thing that was very touching to me was the reproduction of the diary pages.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Really wonderful. That's never been done before.
Yeah. Can you lift your mic up a little bit
to
your
sure.
mouth? Okay,
yeah,
good.
That's never been done before.
Yeah, that's
diary pages.
Those have never been published before.
No.
Yeah. So what was it like to revisit those pages?
Well, it's
a long time ago.
That's a hard question to answer because I don't have a real sense of time. To me, 30 years ago was yesterday.
Right.
I have an ongoing sense of time.
Yes. No. So you don't feel like that's a different person in those studio diaries?
Not at all. No.
And they're very in depth, the diaries.
Yes.
It was like as if you knew that one day you would want to be looking at what you were thinking about, because you do a lot of sort of models of the works.
Yes.
All the ways that you're thinking about it.
Yes.
Yeah. What was going on in your life at that time, though?
You got to be kidding.
This is what we talked about yesterday.
Well, at what, you mean in 1972?
Yeah. So you were a mother, right?
I was a mother of an impossible child, very smart, and her whole goal in life was to outwit her mother, which she succeeded rather well in doing most of the time. She's not here tonight because she has a cold.
Yeah. So you can speak freely.
Yeah.
That's true. She does anyway. So yeah, the diaries are incredible. There's also a lot made of your time at Black Mountain College.
Yes.
I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that too.
Yes. Well, in Montreal, I had gone both on Saturdays to École de Beaux-Arts and had a very formal training that was 300 years old, which was in some way very helpful because I used that training the rest of my life in my work. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, from there I went to Black Mountain College, where nobody had any training. Everybody was from New York, and everybody knew how to do it automatically. And
that's how it works.
And it was very exciting being at Black Mountain. As soon as I got there, my best friends became Rauschenberg and Twombly, which was, really up. But also, it was everybody. It was like being in a community of about 35 geniuses. And so after dinner, for instance, once my roommate, Viola Farber, who later had a dance company, got up and played a very accomplished piano concert. That kind of thing went on all the time. And Bob and Cy were always doing performances, many of which
They were classmates?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
They never went to school. I went to school, but I mean, I thought I was younger than I was when I went there. I actually remembered after we spoke, I was 23 when I went to Black Mountain.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah, because I had some years when I had to, earn a living and figure out how to get there, save money and so on.
Right.
To get there, but I did get there on scholarship. But still, I need.
How did you find out about it? Do you remember?
Yes, I had a very advanced teacher who his name was Gordon Weber, and he was a very interesting man. He was gay, and he had one wooden leg, and he was an expert skier.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I know exactly, and. He introduced me to Russian Constructivism, and he said you should, as I began to work, in a more sophisticated way not more sophisticated, but a different way than doing figure drawings, which I'd been doing up until his class. Pretty much, I'd taken a figure drawing class at the academy, and. So I could really draw the figure, which is a lost art. But anyway, being at Black Mountain was, it was a hotbed of geniuses.
Right.
Yeah, and you never knew who was going to pop up with what, or how they were going to involve you, And I remember once Rauschenberg planned this movie that he was making, and I can't remember, and he never made it. But I remember that he put me in a boat in the middle of Lake Eden, which was the small lake that was there. And I had very long hair to my waist, and with my hair dragging in the water. That's all I remembered. And he was photographing, but I never knew what happened to the film or to the movie or anything like that. And then after I came to New York, I ran into Bob and Cy somewhere. They were living in the financial district, and I was living on 89th Street. Because my daughter's school was on 89th Street. And we immediately became friends again and began, they had absolutely no money, so we'd go to Horn and Hardart's and ordered mashed potatoes with gravy. and what other vegetable, that sort of living. Yeah. Of course, Bob and Cy almost immediately started showing with Charles Egan, which was the gallery to show with in those days. And
you started working with Bob, right?
Not for a long time. Okay. No, this was probably 20 years before I worked for him.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
No, and he knew me, and he knew that from Black Mountain, I had a child, and that I was very well organized. And what happened was that one day I was walking on Chambers Street where I lived, and I ran into him, and he just spontaneously, remembered how organized I was and so on, and that he said, why don't you come and work with me and straighten out my life? And I thought, is that the job I really want in life? And I said, okay, I will do it, but only for 6 weeks. So I saved for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun working for Bob. The difficulty was that he was, by that time, an alcoholic. When I'd known him earlier, he had not been an alcoholic at Black Mountain, but once he won the Venice Biennale, it did something to him, and he became an alcoholic. And we're talking severe drinking here. But, Bob was so creative, and he was also, he wanted me to work in the studio with him, which I did not want to do because Bob drank. And Bob was like the Pied Piper of Hamelin. He could get anybody to do anything he wanted. And I didn't want to become a drinker. And so I hired Bryce to work.
Bryce Martin,
to work in the studio with him, and Bryce became an alcoholic.
So your instincts were right there.
Had to go into recovery for it, actually.
Yeah.
And he wasn't not an alcoholic for very long in his life. And I really loved Bryce's work. I think he was a painting genius.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, since we're sort of in that era, but kind of ahead of it, you were at Black Mountain, and then how did you end up coming to New York?
Well, all the teachers I had, which were the snazzy New York artist teachers.
Max Dane among them. Right?
Well, Max wasn't a New York person. He stayed at Black Mountain, actually. But the art teachers like Jack Dworkoff and people like that, de Kooning and so on, all said to me, you have to go to New York.
Yeah.
And my husband did not want to come to New York, and I had a baby. But everybody kept saying, and I just kept saying, we're going to New York, and we went to New York. And after we were here for about maybe a year and a half, we split up. And then I had to figure out how to support myself and a child in New York, and I'd never been trained to do anything.
What did you do?
Oh, I can't really remember. I thought I was a waitress.
You were a waitress, yeah.
Yeah, I was a waitress, and I was the world's worst waitress. I won the worst waitress prize, and one time I even dumped poached eggs into somebody's lap, into a man's lap, and he started to laugh. Thank God. I just was not going to have to be a waitress.
Yeah. It's a hard job. It's a very hard job.
It's a very hard job. It's incredibly hard job because there's a whole thing between you and the cook where you ordered the food, and then other waitresses would take the food you ordered because the faster they were, the bigger tip they got. And, and I wasn't used to being aggressive and that way, and so on. So yes, it was trying, and
but you're in New York.
I can't remember what I did after I was a waitress. But I know that this time I was living on Chambers Street, and I was walking down Chambers Street and ran into Bob, and he said, come and work for me.
Right.
And I said 6 weeks, but stayed 3 years.
Was that after you were dancing with Judson, or? No,
that was when I started to work for Bob. I was also I'd started ballet when I was 4, so I had a lot of dance training, and at Black Mountain I danced with Merce Cunningham.
Right.
Yeah. I had dance training, and so I it was just a natural to go into the Judson Dance Theater workshop.
Yeah. Do you remember how you ended up there? You said yesterday you wandered in.
No, I didn't wander in.
Oh, okay.
No.
Sorry.
I don't really remember how it happened that I became part of that. But I think Judson was known as, an avant-garde place for art, and I think probably maybe I did wander in.
Well, I think what you said was that you found yourself in the middle of things, kind of very naturally and organically, without much
especially
effort.
Working for Bob, it was just middle of everything very quickly.
Yeah,
including many of the performances that he did, some of which were at Judson.
Yeah.
One of which I was nude in a raincoat.
Yeah, I think we have that in the book, actually. Right, yeah. So at that time, too, were you in your studio when you were dancing? Were you working in your studio?
I actually, I was living with Mel Bachner, and he had 2 floors on Chambers Street.
Yeah.
And he had a studio on the top floor, and a studio on the top floor, and we lived on the top floor. And on the bottom floor was my daughter Christine's room, and I had a studio on the bottom floor. And I wasn't really working on it, but one time because I didn't know what to do, and what to make, and so on. And one time I was dancing, and I suddenly saw the work before my eyes. I just saw this work that was, I was studying math all the time, and I saw this work materialize before my eyes on set theory.
Yeah.
And so I walked off the dance floor, I never danced again, and went into my studio and made this work based on set theory. And as I said, I was living with Mel Bachner at the time, and Mel was incredibly encouraging. He just, he just went ape when he saw me doing this work, and he physically helped me with it and so on.
Yeah.
Very kind.
Yeah. So then you started exhibiting in group shows?
Well, I was working with Bryce at Bob. As I said, I hired Bryce. And Bryce was showing with Bykert Gallery.
Right.
And Klaus Curtis was the director of Bykert. And he would call Bob's to talk to Bryce. And we would always joke around on the phone. And finally, he said, "What do you do?" Now, every artist in New York City was trying to get him to look at their work, and he said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm an artist, I work." And he said, "I want to look at your work." And I said, "Oh, no, you can't." I mean, that's how withdrawn in a way I was. I mean, I was working like hell, but I was personally withdrawn from how to enter the world in any way.
Yeah.
But he was persistent, and he kept saying, "I want to look at your work." And he came and looked at the work, and it was actually some panels that were covered with graphite, different sizes, and some weren't covered, and some had oil on them, and they were all strung out around my studio. And as I said, I had a fairly big studio for those days, and I mean, it was maybe 20 by 20 or something like that. And he came and looked at the work, and he said, "You have to condense it." And as soon as he said that, I mean, he looked for an hour. He was amazing. And he said, "You have to condense it." And I thought, damn, he's really right. So I condensed it.
What does that mean?
I had to make the parts join together, relate to each other, not as spread out parts, but as units. And I did that, and I called him again. And he asked me to be in a 2-person show with Richard Van Buren in the fall. I think it was to be in December. And then as the time drew closer, I did more work and had him come down.
Yeah.
And he said, "I'd like to give you a 1-person show."
Yeah.
And that's how that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that show got a lot of attention, didn't it? And
The Museum of Modern Art bought work from my first show.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting about it to me is like you just weren't looking for it.
Oh, no, anything but, no.
Yeah, and it happened anyway.
Yeah. Just happened.
Yeah.
Which in that not looking for it probably added to the,
right, the mystique.
the desire to get it. I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what else should we talk about? I mean, I'm interested in hearing about like what it must have been like to be introducing these like mathematical concepts at that time. Like
That's a very good question, because everybody, especially at that time, everybody had horrible math teachers.
Yeah.
And, they've been ruined by high school.
Yeah.
And so here I am doing math, not everybody's love. But I was able to do it in such a way. I turned physical objects of chipboard and oiled paper and so on into equations. And I think the early work was showing the work with the equations on top, and it made everything available to everybody. It was just like,
it was very,
oh, that's what that is.
It's inviting. It was inviting.
Yeah, it was inviting, but it was like people who, had failed in high school suddenly understood equations because it was so simple.
Yeah. And also the materials that you were using were really distinct at that time.
Well, they were distinct, but of course they weren't distinct to me.
Right, yeah.
And I always, and do to this day, find that materials have their own voice. And that's,
you have a really unique,
I listen to their voice.
Right, but you're still the boss of them.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. We have to kind of wrap up this part of this now.
So let's throw open to questions.
So that we can open it up to questions and do the book signing. So are there any questions from the audience? We have a mic.
My question, Dorthea, is, this extensive training that you had as a young person in Montreal. I mean, the
extensive training in what?
Your training in fine art and your sort of skill set.
The 300 years before the
exactly. But I always feel looking at your work that you can see that in every piece that you've made. Yes, I use
all of that training today.
Exactly. And I just wondered if you could speak a bit about that, because you used that training, but you used it, of course, in a completely unconventional way. And I was interested to hear you say that about what I presume were probably lots of male artists who had not the training and whose work looks very different to yours. But when I look at your work, I see all of that in every gesture and decision and medium and material that you've chosen.
I'm so glad that you do. That's great. Well, for instance, the early training was, if you wanted to make purple, you glazed blue with red on top of it, or the reverse, depending on the degree of purple you wanted to make. And so I used all of those really Renaissance ways of working. And I think I looked things up. I studied them,
It's really lovely to get to hear you talk about the history of how you got here. I will say that it's interesting to think about, how you went from a classical tradition to go to Black Mountain, and what was it in particular? Just because it was the place to be, but considering that if you had such direct classical training, how did you pick? I mean, it was the place to be, but nevertheless, why is it that you thought that was the place to go?
I don't exactly remember the process of, applying to Black Mountain, getting in, but they didn't give scholarships, and I sent them samples of my work, which were, I think old-fashioned French painting, and they gave me a scholarship. So I went there on scholarship, which meant that I had to work for a year at 3 jobs, just like sleeping 3 hours a night, working the rest of the time to get the money that I would need to use for supplies. And even though it was the Black Mountain College, you lived there, but I needed money, so I worked for a year very, very hard to get the money. And my parents, of course, they just couldn't understand who I was ever. As a child, all the way up, they couldn't understand it. They couldn't understand what I was doing. And of course, I was leaving for the States, which I think was the ultimate crime in Canada at that time.
I'm glad I'm here too. I was just thinking, something I never asked you before was, could you name or just tell us some of the artists that have really inspired you? And I know they're not all contemporary artists, so who comes to your mind as somebody that's like a deep inspiration for you?
Well, it's really Renaissance artists, and I just am not. The names are not coming to the top of my mind, probably because I'm on exhibit here. but Giotto, yes, very much. I studied Giotto. I was really interested in Giotto's personality and how capable he was of projecting his personality into work. And I was also studying angelology. I looked into angelology, and the Egyptians had angels. Now, where does this idea of angels come from? I mean, the Persians had angels. How, why are people thinking of angels guiding their lives? And they thought, in those days, that each person had an individual angel who helped them through life, which is a beautiful idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe to follow up, do you consider yourself spiritual?
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's, believing in a higher power has what has helped me through life.
I wanted to ask about the materials that you use in paper and chipboard, and you mentioned that the materials speak to you. Could you share some of the things that they say?
Well, I think I first started using them because they were what the local art store, which no longer exists, was carrying. And they were really carrying them for people to gesso and paint on, and I just started using them as a raw material because as the voice of the material, yeah.
I've never asked you this before, but I love that you say materials speak to you. And when you went through your show at Dia Beacon and you saw the plethora of materials that you turned into your work, more recently you did in a couple of your last group shows and one woman show, you used the materials of rope and tubs and water. How did those materials speak to you?
Well, first of all, there's something about the gallery I was working in. And there's something about the way the walls existed reflected my imagination to make those materials. I knew that they'd be sensational in that space.
And they were.
Yeah. Well, at least you and I think so, but and my dealer who's here. but yes, I was thrilled by that show. Thrilled by doing it. I was thrilled by that show. Not one work sold. Hard to imagine. And I don't think any of it sold yet, has it, David? Anyway, somehow I managed to find a way to live in spite of things like that.
Can you talk about your daily practice and how it's changed over time?
Well, I can try. Usually I go to sleep thinking about art and making art in my imagination before I go to sleep. So right now, before I go to sleep, I'm thinking about some work that I want to do, which is made from paper bags. And I think paper bags have a simply beautiful geometric structure to them. I haven't begun the work yet. And I don't quite know why, because I want to begin it. But, paper bags are such a beautiful structure, and they're utilitarian, and we use them every day, and they're part of our lives, and why don't we breathe them in? Well, I'm breathing them in. Yeah.
You were going to talk a bit more about Black Mountain. Love to hear.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, it was a hotbed of geniuses. I mean, I mean, it was just unbelievable. And there was never more than a student body of about 25 at Black Mountain, and everybody wanted to teach there. So there was some big uprising at the Chicago University, and all the teachers came to Black Mountain. They didn't get paid. They got paid $100 a month and food and board, and they all taught there. And so I got to study. I had this academic, I still do, this academic bend. I like to read academic things, and so I took some academic courses, and those teachers were thrilled because none of the artists wanted to take those courses. I mean, talk Rauschenberg into taking an academic course, useless. But I just loved it, and yeah, it was, as I said, after dinner, everybody ate in the same dining hall, and after dinner, somebody would get up and give a piano concert, or or Merce Cunningham dancers would get up and give a dance concert. I mean, it was just, you couldn't wait to get up in the morning because every day was an exciting. I think we all have this learning gene in us that gets killed, and somehow that learning gene came alive at Black Mountain, and everybody wanted to learn and experience and make and and rebel against and so on. So it was just, as I said, it was a hotbed of geniuses. I couldn't believe it. It was just fantastic. And they never had any money, and there were two cooks, Cornelia and Mallory and Cornelia. And Mallory and Cornelia had a great sense of humor about the kinds of food they were cooking, which was food that didn't cost very much money. Yeah, and also they lived in what was called the gatehouse at the entrance to the college, and they just they did things like they made liquor. And they buried it. Somehow they made this liquor and they buried it. And then they sold it to students. Yeah. So that was Black Mountain, but the teachers were, everybody there was what the teachers and the students were, geniuses, and then most of them went on to do something, be something. The poetry was great. I learned to love poetry there. Charles Olson taught poetry, and it was just you got up just yearning to learn, and you learned all day long, every day. It was superb. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been so wonderful. I think we're going to move to the book signing portion of the evening. So yeah, thank you all for coming, and
thank you.